Think back for a minute. It's April 2020, and by now it has become very clear that the pandemic is going to really mess up all your strategic plans for the year ahead. You haven't had much sleep figuring out how to keep employees working in all your different regions, keeping customers happy and making sure you remain productive, and that your supply chain is not disrupted.
Buhle, too soon. I think we're having flashbacks here to 2020. But I can imagine that some people listening to us are in a cold sweat just remembering and thinking about that period. Stay with us, though, because if you do remember the disruption of 2020, the point is that although we knew for sure that this was the most unprecedented change we'd ever had, by July that year, when we were speaking to some of our clients, they hadn't changed their plans. They still had the same targets, still had the same goals for the year. They were still pushing their people. No wonder we were all exhausted.
You see, in times of disruption and sudden change, it can be easy to just tweak the numbers a little bit and lower expectations about our returns.
Even though you don't officially change your targets.
Exactly. But then we just keep plowing through with our already set strategy. But how can we navigate and understand the trends that are shaping the future of our business as we go forward?
More importantly, in a VUCA, a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, how do we build better early warning systems for disruption? We need a dashboard or a radar or whatever analogy works for you. Well, stay tuned. That's what this podcast episode is about as we delve into the world of understanding future disruptive trends.
Welcome to the Tomorrow Today podcast, mapping the future of business. My name is Buhle, and as always, I'm joined by my colleague Graeme Codrington. Graeme, we're in the same place again for this episode.
I could get used to this, having you in my studio. I think it's a lot better for our conversation, and I hope people are hearing it, that we're a little bit more conversational. When
Absolutely.
We're in the same room.
Because for some people who don't know, I'm usually based in Nova Scotia, Canada, and Graeme here in Johannesburg, South Africa. But for this episode and the previous one, we are actually both in Johannesburg. What are we talking about this episode?
Yeah, this episode is one of my passions. We're delving into an area that is super important. It's kind of what my expertise is and what I bring to the business. It's understanding future trends and how to map them out in our business. And here with you, the most important thing for people to understand, in fact, there's three important things that we're really going to try and get across in this episode, is that we need to be looking for disruption. Disruptive change is the key. There's always change going on around us. There's always something to analyze: politics, economics, technology, and so on. But which of those are disruptive? The second thing is that we need to equip everybody, especially the leaders, but I think everybody in our businesses, to be part of this process. It's not something that we should just leave to a strategy team. And then thirdly, I think it needs to be something that's ongoing in the system. That it's not something you do once a year, or even worse, some companies do it once every 3 to 5 years. They go on a big strategy session. It does need to be ongoing. So yeah, we are futurists. We can't predict the future, but we can anticipate disruption and build a skill set in ourselves and our teams that allow all of us to do this together.
So in this episode, as you heard, we are talking about understanding disruptive change and understanding future trends that can shape your business. So Graeme, let's get to it.
In 2016, we put together a scenario. We, at that stage, were calling our scenarios news bulletins from the future. And it was a lovely way to just get people thinking about what might happen. And I remember very distinctly that we wanted to do something about pandemics. And I interviewed a few epidemiologists and people who knew what they were talking about in this space. And we came to the conclusion that to try and get people to understand what a pandemic might feel like, that there was just a vague possibility. This was 2016. There was a vague possibility that what you might want to do if there's a big global pandemic is quarantine. And our picture of the worst quarantine we could imagine was that countries would close their borders, so that airports would be closed, borders, ships and harbors, and you wouldn't be able to get out of your country. We thought we were stretching people to think about what worst case scenario would be in that environment. And the scenario was written in a way that the quarantine has just ended. And now there's this crazy travel rush going on all around the world. And Buhle, I remember that we called it the Costa Rican Flu. We were pretty sure that it would be coming from China, but we didn't want to irritate our Chinese clients. I say that with a bit of shame now. We should have just been bold and claimed the China thing. Anyone from Costa Rica, I'm really sorry. I don't know why we picked on you. But we just called it Costa Rican flu. We were pretty sure it wouldn't come from an equatorial region. We sent this out to our clients, and our clients were giving us feedback saying, this is the craziest scenario you've ever sent us. This is never going to happen. Why waste our time? We pushed back a little bit and we said, just take a few minutes. Think about it. What would you do if? That was the basis of our thinking. What would you do if? Anyway, of course, now the rest is history. We didn't predict COVID. That's not what we're suggesting here at all. But when COVID hit us in 2020, we had quite a few of our clients come back to us and say, remember that thing you said? And that's the point, isn't it? Remember that thing you said. They had spent, even if it was just 20 minutes, thinking about what might happen if, what was the possibility. And the clients who had done that were more prepared, and really, I do think, saw more positive response in their the way that they reacted. And they were able to respond faster than those of our clients and other people who were completely surprised by COVID.
Yeah, that was a great example of how to analyze or how to sort of like look at future trends in a way that makes you think about what that would mean for your business. How would that disrupt your business? Or how would that disrupt the way that you do things? And I think this is exactly what leaders need to be thinking about now more and more. I think we've had with COVID, we've had such a huge example of what and sort of like a global event of that nature could do in order to disrupt or derail the way that we do things. So when we talk about disruptive trends in business, what are we really referring to? Let's define it for our listeners. We're talking about patterns of change, whether in technology, culture, or consumer preferences that gain momentum over time and bring significant change to the existing systems. And I think therein, if we could underline that, bring lasting change to the existing systems. And I think sometimes when people think about trends, it's very easy to think about what is trendy. Yeah. And I think that's not what we're talking about. Because what is trendy changes, because anything that's trendy today is not trendy tomorrow. But when you talk about disruptive trends and you talk about disruptive change, you're talking about something that fundamentally changes the way things are done from that point on, and that will affect your business and your organization.
Yeah, I think there are three types of futurists, if you like. Nobody can predict the future. I mean, let's be honest.
Absolutely.
If I could predict the future, I wouldn't, all due respect to you, I wouldn't be doing this for a living.
Yeah, would be enjoying some time somewhere
We'd own a continent
on the beach.
But nobody can predict the future.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. But the trendy things, it is important to track what's trendy. There are the consumer specialists who try to say what's next season's hot thing coming. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and there's a lot of people who do some very smart work there. Retailers need them and love them. Then, of course, there's the other end of the spectrum, which is the guys who do the 50 years from now, 500 years from now. Ray Kurzweil, for example,
the scenario
Singularity.
planners.
But even beyond scenarios, they're like, when are the flying cars coming and when are we going to live on Mars and things like that. Also, that's important because it stretches our strategic imagination. We find ourselves in between, and we think that businesses need this little, I call it what happens after what comes next. So you've got your strategy, you kind of know what you're doing for the next few months, the next few years, but the very next thing after that, and you're absolutely right about highlighting that what we focus on is on what is likely to change the rules of the game.
Yeah. And I think that's it. When we talk about changes to the rules, I think maybe sometimes, you and I, we know what we're talking about when we say changes to the rules of the game. But I think some of our listeners might be thinking, yeah, I can understand changes to the rules of the game in a sports scenario. But in business, what does that look like?
Sure. Well, maybe an example is going to be most helpful here. So if you think about how does our business run, and then you can look at it from a product or services perspective or clients or employees. So pick any part of the business. There are certain rules for success and failure there. So for example, before COVID, most companies, when they thought of their employees, the rule of the game was my employees better live within commuting distance of the office. Because we're all going to come to the office, and sure, some people live closer, it takes them half an hour. Some people live further away, 2 hours. But that's your problem, not my problem, right? And the rule of the game was we have an office, you'd better be here. There's office hours. I expect to see you. Obviously, what COVID did was change that dramatically. But I think COVID just accelerated what was going to happen anyway. I think already the technology was developing, younger generation was arriving. Companies were becoming a little bit more flexible anyway. And then COVID hit us hard, and we were forced to work from home. And so now the rule has changed. People know that you can work remotely. You can work for a company in a different country, in a different time zone, if you wanted to. We're not saying you have to. We're not saying it's the best way to work, but all we're saying is it's not a rule anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing, even you think about looking for work on platforms like LinkedIn, more and more people on LinkedIn are actually searching for jobs in places they're never planning to move to. And that's a reality now. And tied to that example is like online meetings, for example, right?
Yeah.
Because that affects not only sort of like the business within an organization, but also how we connect with clients. For those who are in consulting, and doing client calls or engaging. Can you imagine, Graeme, we used to be stuck in traffic to go to meetings to talk about what we're going to talk about with them. And now it's laughable 4 years later. So that is what we are talking about, where the rules of the game changes so much that what used to be normal seems so strange and distant. And I love this, and I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I like it when we do this with clients to think about some of the crazy things that we used to do. Let's pick a decade in the 80s. and now when we look back and we say, I can't believe we used to do that in order to get our business done. Yeah. And so those are the kinds of things that leaders need to be prepared and actually be ahead of as they plan their scenarios and as they get their whole teams to work together in anticipating the change.
And we're not saying that a change to the rules for success and failure means now there's a new regulation that requires you to do something or you're forced to do something different. So, for example, not everybody loves online meetings. But if you're thinking about how things have changed, you've at least got more options than you used to have before. And part of the problem is that some people haven't changed.
Yeah.
So they took their old way of doing meetings, they dumped it into Teams or Zoom, and that's why everybody hates it at the moment. So people say, I actively dislike meetings. Most of my meetings should be emails, and most of my emails should be messages. And this is the shift that hasn't taken place.
So maybe, Graeme, we should be reinventing meetings completely, just as a way to go forward.
But that's in fact a great example of what we're saying. So COVID forced a technology shift. A technology shift came about to a culture shift. A culture shift created more options. And now we've got the opportunity to reinvent and reimagine.
Yeah.
And that really is the flow of what a futurist does. We're not trying to predict what will happen, but we're trying to open our minds to what's possible. And then when a change happens in the environment, we're ready for that change and we accept the invitation of the new opportunity and the new idea. And COVID is an example of us doing it and then forgetting that we did it. I think most companies have gone backwards in the last year.
Yeah.
And people are exhausted by their online meeting schedule and their offline requirements to go back to the office. People just haven't learned from that.
Yeah.
And, well, that's what this episode is about. How do we learn from these disruptions?
Well, Graeme, you've mentioned, we've both have mentioned a number of times that leaders need to think like futurists. So let's define that. What is a futurist? And I know that we've defined this before, and some of you might have heard this before, but I think for this episode, it is actually one of the important definitions that we need to look at. And so a futurist, the way that we think about it, is not someone who's sitting there with a crystal ball that can tell the future. A futurist is someone who is able to understand and to see and understand the meaning and implications of change.
Yeah.
And so it's going forward. It's very important not only to be aware of these future disruptive trends, but also to have the ability to identify and analyze these trends. And so one of the things that we do is help our clients with some of these frameworks that they can use to understand the meaning and implications of change that's happening around them, and also to actually become their own futurists in their businesses and to create a culture where thinking like a futurist is part of how we do things in our business. Could you talk us through maybe one of those frameworks that we take our clients through?
Yeah, so the starting point for doing this with you and your team. So if you sitting here listening to us and you're thinking, that makes sense, and I need to get people in my team involved in doing this and thinking about the future and trying to predict where disruption will come from, then we believe that there are 5 places that deep disruption will come from, and we've got a nice model called the TIDES model of disruptive change. TIDES is an acronym, TIDES, and we believe that almost all of the disruptive change over the next few years will come from. T is from technology. That's an obvious place to start, right?
Absolutely.
We live in the digital age. We live in a world full of technology. And like you said earlier, we've got to try and distinguish between the trendy technologies, just the faddy things that come along that maybe a year or two from now we're going to have forgotten. Like, remember Google Glasses?
Yes.
You know, everyone was super excited. Well, maybe I'm just a nerd. And I've got pictures of me wearing the Google Glasses. And then, this is why we have a team, because the rest of the team was laughing at me. And I realized, okay, I think this is just trendy, not a trend. But then you want to have a look at ChatGPT as an example then. This is not trendy. This is now a trend.
Yes.
It might not be able to do everything the hype masters suggested, but it's certainly one of the most powerful tools we've ever seen.
I want to stay with those Google Glasses because I think sometimes the trendy things are also highlighting something that is going to become really important. And so when you think about that trendy Google Glass that didn't really take off, But what did take off is this idea of augmented reality, right?
Good example, exactly.
And so sometimes even within the trendy, there's still something there that you can sort of like look at. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect example. So there's technology, and it's a case of keeping our eyes on technology and trying to differentiate trendy from trend and work out what's the trend behind the trendy. Okay, let's leave trends behind. Okay, the second is I. I is for institutional change. And if I can say so myself, I think this is one of the smarter parts of our model, because a lot of these views of analysis of the environment around us look at politics and economics, and of course those are important, but we think the way to look at them, the better way to look at them, is to say institutions are the ways in which we put our world together. These are the systems and structures. So it could be nation states, political parties, it could be industries and sectors, it could be functions in businesses, it could be your business and the products and services. Each one of these is a structure that's got rules for success and failure.
Yeah.
And we believe that any system you can think of, any institution you can imagine right now is undergoing deep structural change at the moment. In other words, the rules are being rewritten. My favorite examples to give of this, and we can get very controversial very quickly here, is, for example, the smallest institution in the world is the family. And the definition of family is changing. If you're in a marketing team, give me a picture of a family. Yeah. That's not going to get you into trouble on a billboard. What would your picture be of a family?
Well, that's the exciting thing, is that actually there's so many ways that you can go. So you can deliberately say, I'm going to choose to be provocative. And whatever provocative means, for the particular audience. Yeah. But you will have to pay for it sometimes,
yes,
for that choice.
Then another audience is going to say, no, too provocative.
Exactly.
You stepped out of it. And, then you can have a look and say, well, up to the biggest institutions in our world at the moment, like religions. And I have quite a bit of fun if we're then talking about family. The Roman Catholic Pope was asked a few months ago what he thought of gay marriage. And his answer was, who am I to say? Like, my answer is, you're the Pope. That's literally your job, is to say. And then, as far as at least Catholics believe, what you say is supposed to be then eternal truth. And he's going, who am I to say? And I go, look, I like the Pope because he's got that attitude, but maybe he's not understanding the institution. Or, to be fair, and apologies to the Roman Catholics who might be switching off now, I'm not intending to offend or insult the Pope. I'm giving an example of somebody who in fact himself is recognizing my institution is changing.
Yes.
So that's institutional change. And it goes back to those rules for success and failure in your industry, in your business. The D is for demographics, and demographics is about populations. This is about how old people are, how long they're going to live, when they get married, how many children they have, if they live in cities or rural areas, if they migrating around the world. I think every single one of those things I've mentioned is changing dramatically.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. How long do you plan to live for?
Yeah. So that's quite interesting.
For example.
That's quite interesting because, I don't want to answer that question, but I think when we're thinking about what is a lifespan that we used to think of. We used to think, 80 years, that's pretty good. 90 is really good. I mean, if you go beyond 95, you're really, really lucky. But now we are looking at the reality that more and more people are reaching their 100th birthday, and more people are going to surpass their 100th birthday. I think I saw a 105-year-old running a marathon, and then I was looking at myself and was like, what's my excuse, right? and so that's a that's a huge change there.
I'm 117 in dog years already, so that's my excuse. No. Okay, so that's demographics, and it's changing, and this is the one that actually changes the world in the biggest predictable way, because demographic shifts happen slowly. Quick example, if this year we have lots of babies born, then in 4 or 5 years' time, we're going to need more primary schools.
Yeah.
In 13 years' time, we're going to need more high schools. In 18 or 19 years' time, more universities. In 26, 27, 28, 32 years' time, more wedding photographers.
Yes.
And so the list goes on. So you can actually predict into the future when quite a lot more confidently with demographic shifts. Yeah. The E stands for the environment. I think that speaks for itself. It's about natural resources and a stressed planet. And then S is possibly the smartest part of the model, because a lot of the other four and a lot of other models look at the external forces that are coming our way, coming ready or not. If you remember saying that as a hide and seek when you were a kid. For us, though, the S adds an additional layer. The S is for social values. And this can be framed as, what do people want? So it's one thing to say it's coming. The next question is, but do people want it? If people do want it, it will come faster. If people don't want it, they can delay it a long time. And right now, again, a simple example here is driverless cars.
Yeah.
So we know the technology exists, and to be honest, I actually think the technology is already fine. Yes, some driverless cars crash, but then cars with drivers in them crash even more. The institutional shifts are taking place. You know, the industries are being set up, the systems are being set up. Demographically, it will help people. Older people who struggle to see, younger children who maybe need to get to school in a car, now their parents have to take them. If we could just put them in the car safely, that'd be great. Most of them are electric, so it's good for the environment. But when we say to people driverless cars are coming, I can see in the audience there's people folding their arms and looking at me like, no, Graeme, you can come and get my steering wheel out of my cold, dead hands. I'm not giving up my driving. I love my car. And we need to recognize that actually driverless cars are not an exciting prospect for most people. So although we know they could come faster, we're pretty sure they're going to come slowly, because there's going to be pushback from social values. Just an example.
Yeah.
But social values are hugely important to consider when you're looking at what's happening and how fast it will happen. Anyway, that is the model, the TIDES model of disruptive change. And we think that this is a lovely model for you to use with your team to think about what is happening.
Just staying with the model of TIDES, as Graeme has so aptly sort of like explained to us what each letter in that acronym stands for. I think it is important for us to just pause for a minute and think about, what does this mean for our business? So the way that you apply the TIDES model is to think about these sort of like these as forces of disruptive change. So the technology which will transform your organization, and we really believe that then sooner or later it will start to transform our organizations to be more bionic. So that's a direct impact of the T. And then when you think about the institutional changes, this again requires your whole industry to transform the operational procedures to keep up with the changing landscape, for example.
And for me, the T and the I combined in business push us to be looking for business model innovation.
Yes.
So not just what new products and services can we offer, but how can we transform our entire organization from the inside out?
Absolutely. So, absolutely, Graeme, because if we've got now all this new technology and we've got sort of like these institutional changes, what are we going to do different in our business, in our organization, in order to meet the changing landscape? And so, and then when you think about the D and the S, I'm just putting those together, sort of like the demographics and the social values that will require institutions to cater to an increasingly diverse and sometimes very polarized clientele and workforce. And I think, we don't stop long enough to think about that. So I think there's been a lot of focus on diversity. And now what businesses are needing to be thinking more about is not only how do we cater to a diverse demographic, but how do we cater to a diverse and polarized demographic? And that's a harder question to answer for business leaders. Because on one hand, in your reaching out to a diverse audience, we've seen this many times. We've seen it just recently with some marketers who sort of like go out of the way to show that they're inclusive and that they understand diversity. But in doing that, all of a sudden, polarize or turn off a huge segment of their population. That's something that we haven't really thought about. And now all of a sudden businesses are having to think about. And I left the environment on purpose, and I left it last because I think there could be a little bit more we can talk about when it comes to environment, Graeme, and how this disruptive change is going to really shape business going forward.
Look, I think this is still an example of some of that polarization. I think there's still some people out there who are not convinced that the environment is changing, or even if it's changing, that it's being caused by human activity, or even if it is being caused by human activity, that we need to worry about it at all. And so even this is an example itself of that diverse polarization that we have to deal with. But I think most people who follow us, most of our clients, are pretty convinced that environmental issues, extreme weather, natural resources, pollution, air quality, plastic, more pandemics, all of these come under the issue of the environment, that this is going to disrupt our businesses. And an example is coming up for me. You can have all of the polarized views you like. You can have all of your culture war content that you want to have and your denials. But then when your insurance company contacts you, as some insurance companies are doing, especially in California, Texas, and Florida in the United States, and are saying, we are no longer insuring your house or your factory for weather damage, because there are extreme fires, there are tornadoes, there are new levels of hurricane that we've never seen before, and it's just not worth it for us to insure it. As soon as you can't get insurance for weather-related damage, you can believe anything you like, but the reality is that this environmental issue is now affecting you deeply, and is deeply disruptive to business.
I think what we do see is that a lot of business do pay a lot of lip service to these disruptive trends.
It's a trendy topic, this environmental one at the moment.
Well, it depends on who you're trying to appeal to as well. Going back to the polarization, sometimes it goes with those social values. But again, things like greenwashing and all of that have become a thing now. But think about a few years ago with the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, and again, elected on this platform of this massive green manifesto. And really, she has made a lot of changes in the city of Paris, made many roads, turned them into pedestrian walkways.
I wouldn't want to be a driver in Paris. I've heard it's a disaster. It always was difficult, but now I think it's a disaster by design. That's what she wanted.
It's pushing people away from driving and making it a more walkable city and a bike city, as it were. But I think the big one was the Olympic 2024 and the push for it to be a plastic-free Olympics, the Paris Olympics.
We were super excited when we first heard her talking about that a few years ago. And sadly, I don't think it's a reality at the 2024 Olympics. They had planned for Paris to be plastic free. But, and this is, I suppose, the point you're making here, is that they haven't been able to do that because she's just the mayor of the city. She doesn't have control of the event. And the IOC and the event organizers and all the big sponsors have just basically bulldozed over that. And I think it's a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah.
They could have said, you know what, this is ambitious. This is crazy almost. This is disruptive. It's a change to the rules for success and failure. This is the point we're making. And they could have given it a good go. And they maybe would have even succeeded.
But the point remains, whether we like it or not, or whether we embrace or resist these attempts to deal with the environmental changes, we need to be thinking about what's possible and probable.
Exactly.
And Paris 2024, it didn't happen for the Olympics, but the truth of the matter is that this is coming. It is going to affect businesses, and businesses need to think about it. And so, which is why then it's important to start almost developing the muscle to have that ability to do scenario thinking in your business. And so it's important not only just for the leaders to exercise the scenario thinking muscle, but also to get the whole team thinking about the future and thinking about the impact of the changes that are happening is going to have in the organization. So, for example, what we encourage our clients to do is to do certain things regularly that forces or challenges or pushes them to think about the future. One of them is the 5 minutes from the future. And this is something that you can do, which is really about saying, every now and then, task someone in your team to go and come up with a 5-minute presentation about any disruptive change from the future that the business hasn't thought about or that they need to be thinking about. And I know that, Graeme, you help a lot with this stuff. So if you don't have any ideas about how to do this, go to Graeme's Throw Forward Thursday videos, because that's where, the stuff you come up with there, it seems crazy. And then, months later, we're reading articles that are talking about. I am convinced that there's something there, Graeme, about being able to see the future. But for you as a leader, that could be something that can help you. The Throw Forward Thursdays, and so task your team members or even yourself to say, okay, what could be something that's disruptive that could happen and that we could think about.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed putting those videos together. Get lots of ideas from the team, but it's nice to be the face of that. We'll put a link in the show notes for you to have a look. We've got more than 150 of those up there. So go and have a look. If you can't come up with those ideas, they're there for you. We'll also put in the show notes a download link for a strategic imagination toolkit. We've taken a few of those Throw Forward Thursday videos and we've put them at some discussion guides around them. And we are passionate in helping you not just to think hypothetically and philosophically about the future, but to develop what you were saying, Buhle, is this strategic muscle. It really is something that can be developed in your team. It doesn't just happen easily. It's not the natural way of thinking. So we do have to specifically develop the tools and skills of thinking like a futurist, of stretching our strategic imagination. But we believe that you need to get everybody in your team involved, not just the senior leaders, not just the specialist strategic planners. And then we believe that you need to do it regularly. And I'll go further, Buhle, not just every now and again. That 5 minutes from the future works best when you do it every week. So one meeting a week, or that you get your team together, ideally the first meeting of the week, take the first 5 minutes to jump into the future and imagine what would happen if. And maybe that's as good a summary as we can give of what we've tried to share with you in this episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast. You need to develop the ability and get into the habit of thinking what would happen if, and then being prepared to take your business into the future.
As we do in every episode, here's a review or a summary of a valuable resource we recommend on the topic we discussed. 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, a book by Yuval Noah Harari. In this book, Harari navigates through today's most pressing issues and offers his insights on what the future holds. He discusses topics like technology, politics, and social issues, providing visionary investigation into the challenges of the 21st century. Although this book came out in 2018, we really still believe that it has a lot of value and is sure to provide you with a deep understanding of future trends and their implications for business and society. Additionally, Harari is set to release a new book titled Nexus. I can't wait for that. Nexus, a brief history of information networks from the Stone Age to AI in September 2024. I hope it's good. Looking forward to looking into that. This upcoming work promises to delve into the evolution of information networks and their impact on our world.
I definitely endorse that book choice. Also looking forward to Yuval's next book because he just has a way of thinking like a futurist. It's a lovely example of the type of work that needs to be done. So, thank you for joining us in this episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast. Here are 3 questions to just summarize what we want you to take away. And if you're a leader of an organization, 3 questions to take to your team and guide your next steps. The first is, what frameworks are you using to think about disruption? You can't just let it happen by accident. You can't just do it randomly. You need some structure. And if the TIDES model works for you, that's great. You might go back to our first episode and think about the gray elephants. The gray elephants, the 7 forces that are shaping the world of this year. Right now, that might even be more of your focus. TIDES is more a 3 to 5 year model. You might have another model. It doesn't matter which model you use, as long as you are using a structured framework to think about the future. Secondly, do you then have a radar process in place? In other words, are you updating your view of the future regularly? And by regularly, we don't just mean once every 3 years or even once a year, but you need to have some way in which people can bring new things that they see. Things happen way too quickly now for us to wait for an annual or a 3-year cycle. So what radar process do you have in place? And we, in fact, have got quite a lot of clients that use us as their radar on a regular basis. And then thirdly, do you get everybody involved? This is not something that should be left up to the senior leadership and then the rest of the organization just told what to do. This is something that everybody should get involved in. Those are the 3 questions, and we hope that they guide you to thinking more like a futurist.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast. We hope you have found it insightful and helpful for your business journey. Please go ahead and check the show notes to recap on what was covered on this episode. Follow us on social media with the links provided. And remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to us right now. See you in the next episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast, Mapping the Future of Business.